Well, hi, how are you? Welcome to Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So that's what I talk about. If you like true crime and you want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should totally like, subscribe, and come hang out with me every Tuesday where I take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old face. I'm very anxious to talk with y'all about today's case. Today's case is kind of one of those ones that kind of hits differently for me because the victims in this case were like raised and born in the same area that I was. So you know how when those cases that happen to somewhere close to you or, you know, someplace that you've lived or something like that just kind of hits different. And I stumbled across this case and it's so sad. And again, hits a little differently for me because I'm from the area that the victims are from. And I've said it before, what makes it more tragic is the victims in this case are so young, which again, all true crime and murder is terrible and heartbreaking and tragic and just stupid, but it's just especially so when the victims are just young babies, you know? Also, before we get into it, I hope I didn't come off as too, sort of like zoned out last week. I was just catching up on everything that I had dropped when I had cast that movie for extras. And I was so tired. I was going, I think, on like 4 hours sleep when I filmed it. So I hope I didn't seem like too out of it or anything. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the bunker murders, all right? And disclaimer wise, we are talking, the perpetrators in this case are also young children. So we are going to be talking about a subject that may or may not make someone comfortable. We're talking about children with guns who are angry and plot to murder people just because in the US of what's, going on and been going on. Just wanted to give y'all a heads up. Just that's kind of subject matter that is discussed in today's case. Also, one of the victims' names, I am hoping to God that I am pronouncing it correctly. So one of the victims' names is Bodhisattva. I was looking up on other pronunciations and the other pronunciation was Bodhisattva, but I ran into more sources that said it was pronounced Bodhisattva and her nickname was the shortened version of her name, so Boda. So I really hope that is the correct pronunciation of her name. I tried really hard to find pronunciations and I found these two, but Bodhisattva was the most common pronunciation that I ran across. So I really hope that's correct. That is how I will be referring to them. All right. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the case of the bunker murders. So Bodhisattva Boda Natasha Sherzer-Potter. She was born July 19th, 1991. And she was born in Newport Beach, California. And she was actually named after the Buddhist beings who guide humans to enlightenment. I actually found quite a few definitions for Bodhisattva and what exactly it means. It looked to me from my research that it kind of depended on what sect, I don't know if that's the correct term, but what sect of Buddhism one follows. But Boda's mother said that she named her daughter after the Buddhist beings who guide humans to enlightenment. Boda's mother's name was Lorraine Leah Sherzer, and she was actually a school psychologist. And she worked with autistic children for the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Boda also had an older brother named Zen. Now, Boda would often accompany her mother to her job and often assist her, and it is said that the children really loved Boda. She was very good with them. Now, since Leah was a psychologist, she, of course, taught her daughter how to think like a psychologist. She really emphasized the importance of mental health and mental illness to her children and taught them ways on how you could help help people who struggle with these kinds of issues. In 1998, when Bodhi was around 7 or so, the family relocated and they moved to Helendale, California. And here, the family had plans to build their dream home. Now, Bodhi was very early in all of her important developmental milestones and stuff. Like, she talked early, her vocabulary especially flourished when she was very young. It expanded very quickly. Growing up, her hair was always very unmanageable. And Leia says Bodhi always had to have her hair cut short because of how unmanageable it was for her. And this was especially annoying for her when she was very, very young, because more often than not, she was mistaken for a boy. Now, from kindergarten through 2nd grade, Bodhi did gymnastics. And in the 2nd grade, she played basketball and even won a few awards. I don't know if it was for her basketball playing or for like her academic skills, because she was also very academically gifted. She did well in school. From 3rd to 5th grade, she took piano lessons, and she was just an overall very accomplished, very active young girl, which I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm kind of jealous of her childhood. I wish I did all those things as a child. Like, I just kind of sat and watched TV and watched movies and stuff. Bodhi took voice lessons, ballet. She loved horseback riding, photography, literature, architecture, old buildings and like old abandoned places. And she actually had aspirations to be a film producer. Not gonna lie, the more I learned about Bodhi, I was like, oh my god, like, I really identify so much with this chick. All of her interests, and just, she seemed like so much fun, did all kinds of fun stuff. She just seemed like such a bright, fun young girl to be around. Bodhi was also very, very creative. Like I said, she wanted to be a film producer when she grew up. Now, Zen has said that it was sometimes hard growing up with Bodhi and growing up in the shadows, quote, of a sister with such creative genius. And she was also great, creative with her words. Like I said, she was very, very good in like English and writing and stuff. Again, another thing I totally identify and relate to with her. She was learning storyboarding, photography, and film when the events of today's case take place. That's what she was sort of kind of diving into. She once said, quote, "I want to take the camera and film what my mind's eye sees, my emotions feel, and my heart needs to say." Which, again, I love everything about Bodhi. She seems like such a very cool chick. And yeah, the more I learned about her, the more I just really related to her. Bodhi also wrote poetry, always had a funny joke to share, and was just sort of like a wacky, fun girl. She did stuff like wearing mismatched socks. Now, because Leia was, I guess, primarily a single mother, I couldn't find any information about Bodhi's and Zen's father, like what that was like. I'm not sure. I think Leia was primarily a single mother, I think. But either way, Leia said that she was very protective of her children, and she described her daughter as, quote, gifted but naive, as, you know, a lot of teenagers are. And, you know, we don't mean that in like an insulting way, right? It's just that, like, you know, when you don't have life experience, of course you're going to be naive to the world. You haven't went out there yet, you know? Leia only started letting Bodhi walk to the grocery store alone when she was about 15 or 16 years old. Like, that's kind of how protective Leia was of her daughter and her son. But even though Leia was overprotective of her daughter, her and Bodhi did have a very good relationship. They did share a very close bond. They did activities together on the weekends, like baking bread and then handing it out to their neighbors. And Bodhi, at 16 years old, was attending the Academy of Excellence in Apple Valley, California, where I was actually born in Apple Valley. Bodhi was an excellent student. She studied a lot, really enjoyed her studies. It is said that she studied every night till like 11. She was also taking courses at Victor Valley Community College, which was the local community college, and she was already taking classes. And she had aspirations of attending the LA Film School. Teachers described Bodhi as intelligent, talented, and said that she definitely had a very, very bright future ahead of her. Her friends described her as, quote, life-changing, because she just had this ability to make people feel better about themselves. Now, while she's in high school at the Academy of Excellence, she actually meets her boyfriend, a fellow Academia student, 18-year-old Cody Thompson. The two actually met in a film class, and Cody, he was also from Apple Valley. Christopher Cody Thompson. He was born February 10th, 1989 in Victorville, California, and I was primarily raised in Victorville. His mother's name was Pamela and his father's name was Mike Thompson, and he also had two older sisters named Katie and Sarah. Now, Cody's family had actually lived in the Victor Valley area for 4 generations, so they had a lot of roots in the area. Cody was described as just having an enthusiasm for life. He loved animals, especially his pet blue gillfish that he had had since he was 5 years old. He loved attending concerts and loved the outdoors. He loved camping, fishing, rock climbing, and he also loved riding quads and bikes and pretty much off-roading in any ATV vehicle. In fact, he and his mother would often go out and go off-roading together. Cody had actually recently bought a used gold Jeep in order to go off-roading in the desert. He loved it that much. He was also very fond of going down to the river, loved watching NASCAR with his dad. Him and his dad were actually restoring a hot rod together and they worked on it often. They were also very, very close. He also loved biking and skateboarding, and yeah, he just had a lot of outdoor hobbies. He seemed like a very, very fun, cool kid. Cody's first love, though, was music. He loved music. He loved attending rock concerts, and his family said he was also musically gifted. He was one of those people that could pick up an instrument and play with it, and then within a few hours could play it. He was one of those types, and just loved music and was just super, super good at it. He started off playing the clarinet before graduating to the guitar, and he loved the guitar. He actually had 6 of his very own. Now, Cody, like Boda, also had a very stellar reputation among friends and students and faculty at the school. Like Boda, he was also a pretty good student. He had actually been a TA for 2 years for one of his film professors. Cody, his personality was described as being a little more introverted, a little more quiet and shy, reserved. He was described as someone who was more of a listener than a talker. Can totally relate to that. Friends said that Cody was just a very truthful, legitimate guy. He was quick-witted and a bit of a prankster. He liked playing little jokes too because he was that quintessential little brother as well. His friends in high school were describing how, in high school you usually got to worry about, backstabbing and stuff like that because, it's high school and it's awful and it sucks. And they were saying how Cody was just one of those people that you never really had to worry about that. He was a legitimate guy. He was truthful and honest and just an overall good, loyal friend. Pamela said Cody was, quote, the easiest kid to raise. And then, of course, as we know, at the school, Cody meets Boda in one of their classes and they end up as a couple. Now, even though Cody has a very stellar reputation, is a, very handsome, charming young man and has a lot going for him, Leah was not a huge fan of him when Boda first brought Cody home. She said that she thought he looked, quote, a bit rough for her daughter, and she didn't like that he was 18, whereas Boda was still 16. And she actually vocalized these things to Cody. However, with some time, and with Cody's respectful tone and manner, he eventually wore through the overprotective barrier that Leia had, and she came to quite like him and welcome him. Cody ended up graduating from the Academy of Excellence in 2007 and was planning on entering the family contracting business. He told one of his film teachers that he was really excited to work with his father doing some electrician work. However, in his obituary, it said that at the time of the events of today's case, he was employed as a commercial plumber for the family business. And considering his family is a contracting business, it makes sense that he would, probably know a little bit about all kinds of work, right? Electricians work, plumbers work, construction. It is said that he was actually really good with his hands, and he was a really, really good construction worker. And he worked alongside his dad. Like I said, the two had a very close relationship, so, that was kind of awesome. And the two were actually constructing the Thompson dream home together, which I just thought that's super cool. school. Now, Cody's day after he graduated high school consisted of waking up at 4 a.m., working a full day, and then driving all the way to pick Boda up from school, where he'd spend some time with her after taking her home, and then he would go home. It is said that the two were very devoted to one another. So that was Boda and Cody, all right? So let's get to the date of January 4th, 2008. So Boda was actually staying with relatives down in Orange County, and at some point in the evening, she slipped out of her relative's home and was picked up. There were some reports that said that she was picked up by friends, while other reports said that she was picked up by Cody. But either way, she was picked up and driven out to the desert, specifically the desert right outside Barstow. Now, both Cody and Boda attended a party out there, all right? So yeah, I don't know if Cody did pick her up and they drove up there together, or if friends picked Boda up and she met Cody at the party. But Boda and Cody did attend this party that was going on out in the desert. I read some reports that said it was a birthday party for a friend. And at this point in time, Boda and Cody had been together for about a year. Now, this party out in the desert, it wasn't just being held randomly out in the desert. It was being held at these bunkers that were out in the desert. Now, the bunkers, they were the two-story ruins of a World War II airfield. It had been called Hawes Auxiliary Field, and was a subsequent radio relay station for the military. And these bunkers were located in the vast Mojave Desert, about 20 minutes outside of the desert town of Barstow. And yeah, they were just a bunch of abandoned, graffiti-littered bunkers. That was, of course, naturally a go-to party hangout for all of the young kids in the area. It was also, unfortunately, a hangout spot and go-to spot for other seedier types of people in the area, like gang members, white supremacists, and drug dealers, just kind of all around, just kind of not very great people. Now, actually, the weekend before of January 8th, the weekend before Boda and Cody attended this party, Boda had actually taken her mother out to these bunkers. She was driving with her mother, practicing for her driver's test, and she drove her mother out to these bunkers because she thought they were super cool. Remember, she had this fascination with abandoned places and stuff, which I totally get. I am also fascinated by those things. But yeah, she took her mother out there thinking oh yeah, this would be cool. But Leia immediately did not like the bunkers at all. They just kind of gave her a creeped out feeling. And she actually told Boda that she was never to come here again. She told her daughter that the bunkers were the kind of place that bad people came to prey on people just like her. Now, at the party that Boda and Cody attended, there were about 30 people there. All right, so they're partying, hanging out, being teens, out in the desert. There's not a whole lot to do. Now, at one point in the evening, the police arrived, right? They had been called because I guess they were making some kind of bonfire and had been spotted by someone, and so they called the cops. Now, there are police reports from that evening that state that the deputy on scene said that he did not see or smell any alcohol, and that no one appeared to be intoxicated, because remember, these are primarily teenagers we're dealing with. They're under 21. Now, Leia was told by Boda's friends, though, that the police's presence when they, came, it actually caused the teens to, scatter, as they are. I think we've all been to a house party once or twice where, yeah, the cops get called, usually probably because of a noise complaint, and then everyone, probably because they're under 21, takes off. Well, according to Boda's friends, that's what happened, and the teens started scattering, including Cody and Boda, who took off in his Jeep. Now, I'm not sure if Cody was pulled over, but Leia said that Boda's friends told her that Cody was visibly drunk and that they were all, technically trespassing, and they did run from the police. Maybe they were pretty quick and took off before the cops actually got there, But yeah, cops come, nothing major happens, and the cops take off, and so they continue their partying. Now, at around 11 p.m., a vehicle with 3 unknown males come up to the party. They were not known by any of the 30 people there. The 3 males were Colin Lee Mclaughlin, who was 18, David Brian Smith, who was 19, and Cameron James Thompson, who was 16. All 3 were from the Covina area, which was quite a ways from the desert. It's 2 hours away. Now, David and Colin, they were actually the sons of police officers, specifically police officers with the LAPD. I read several sources that said Colin's dad was actually a retired officer with the Los Angeles Unified School District. David, he was a former Eagle Scout, and a former track athlete and student at UC Riverside. And I really don't know a whole lot about him or Cameron. Colin is the only one that I could get a vast amount of information on. So on the day, January 4th, the day of the party in the daytime, David had called a friend who lived in Victorville. This friend's name was Sean Gonzalez. Now, David was asking Sean for directions to the bunker, or the bunkers, out in Barstow. He told his friend that him and Colin and Cameron were all going to go on a camping trip, and he even invited Sean along. And Sean was down until David told him that Colin would be going with him. Sean did not really like Colin a whole lot. He thought he was, quote, psycho. He had evidently gone shooting with David and Colin one time, and he just did not like the vibes that he was getting from Colin, didn't like really being around him. So Sean declined to go on this camping trip. Now, let's get into Colin Mclaughlin. Why would Sean think he was a, quote, psycho? Well, Colin Lee Mclaughlin, he was born on October 26th, 1989 in West Covina, California. His parents were Linda and Wayne Mclaughlin, and actually, when Colin exited his mother's womb, the umbilical cord was actually wrapped around his neck, and the doctors suspected that his brain may have been deprived of oxygen, and that he may have suffered congenital effects. Congenital? Colin was raised in a chaotic, highly dysfunctional household. His father was an alcoholic racist who was obsessed with guns, and he was a cop to boo. Great! While his mother, Linda, was described as, quote, unnurturing, someone who lacked, quote, an attachment bone, and someone who had, quote, no capacity at all to bond with her son. She was often not at home, and Colin was more often than not left to his own devices. His parents would often fight, having numerous fights. They actually lived in separate bedrooms on opposite ends of the house. Wayne was retired, whereas Linda, get this, Linda was a special education teacher for the Los Angeles Unified School District. Yeah, this chick was an educator for special needs children. Both Linda and Wayne had grown up in chaotic, abusive, highly dysfunctional households themselves, so they just, repeated the cycle. One of the many psychologists and psychiatrists who would end up examining Colin said that they had never seen a, quote, sicker family than the Mclaughlins. And when I tell you about Colin's upbringing, it's almost no wonder that the events of today's case take place. Now, it is said that at only the age of 5, Colin had already been described a myriad of medications and drugs, and this was to help stabilize his mood swings. He was known for very, very violent outbursts. He would also spread feces all over the wall, and he actually did this until he was 12 years old. He was diagnosed with multiple psychological disorders all throughout his childhood and teens, including attention deficit disorder, developmental coordination disorder, chronic depression, thought disorder with psychotic features, bipolar disorder, and drug and alcohol abuse. This is all throughout his childhood, guys, and all throughout his teens, all right? He's not even an adult. He's only 18 in this case. Even as early as kindergarten, teachers remember Colin as not being like the rest of the kids. He possessed a plethora of information on the Civil War and weaponry, had difficulty listening and interacting with his peers, and would often pace around the classroom muttering to himself about, quote, guns, weapons, and blowing stuff up. This is in kindergarten, guys. Kindergarten. Now, all of the multiple doctors and psychologists who have examined Colin, spent time with him, they really blame the reason he turned out for the way that he did on his parents, which I think is exactly right on the money. They accuse his parents of failing to set proper boundaries, failing to protect their son from their chaotic lives, and just not caring for his mental health at all. Yeah, can you believe his mom is a special education teacher? Like, it really makes me worried for the poor children under her care. Now, when he was in his teens, Colin began expressing dark fantasies. These fantasies surrounded mass murder and just like killing in general. He expressed these fantasies to friends who, have then called him, like what Sean called him, quote, psychotic. Colin was paranoid, described as a, quote, ticking time bomb, and it is said that he, quote, instilled instilled fear into people and, quote, lived in a world of grandiose delusion. And these delusions were fueled by, quote, narcissism and being self-centered. Linda described some of the problems that Colin had as he was growing up. She said that he would often talk to people in the shower even though there was no one there, and that he would talk with people so often that she would often bang on the door and tell him to, quote, sing instead. We'll get into more of Linda's awesome parenting. So in 2003, when Colin was about 15, there is home videotape of Linda and Colin at her then boyfriend's house, a man named Rick Schellenbaum. And in this video, 15-year-old Colin is chugging 100 proof vodka, Jägermeister, and tequila, all while puffing on a cigar. He then, of course, starts violently throwing up into an orange Home Depot bucket. And Linda, who is recording, by the way, is the camera person in this, is laughing, saying, quote, in the bucket. This woman is garbage. And as he, in between throwing up and Linda laughing, Colin drunkenly slurs, quote, Hitler is going to come and kill me for this. When confronted with the contents of that video, Linda actually defends her actions, y'all. Saying that, well, Colin was there and, talking smack and saying that he could, drink anyone under the table. And so I told him to prove it. And she starts off with, that old boomer spiel about, well, back in my day, if you wanted people to quit cigarettes, you made them smoke until they were sick. And it's yeah, Linda, did you ever stop to think, there's a reason that we don't do that anymore? That's terrible and stupid. This woman is a special education teacher, by the way. She claimed that she was teaching Colin a lesson and brags that this worked because Colin didn't touch alcohol for 6 months after that. Hey, Linda, if he went back to drinking, that means it didn't work. Yeah. Didn't work. Colin continued to have issues with alcohol. During a fight with his mother in September of 2004, Colin threatened to kill his father, then himself, and then smashed a glass picture frame over his head. He was hospitalized for 5 days at the Aurora Charter Oak Hospital in Covina for psychological evaluation. In July of 2006, while Colin was in his garage, he was smoking a cigarette and filling some bullet casings with gunpowder, and an ember of his cigarette actually ignited the gunpowder, causing a huge explosion. And this actually sent Colin to the UC Irvine Hospital, specifically the burn center, for 3 days while he was treated for 2nd and 3rd degree burns. And these burns were to his face and hands. By the time he was 18 years old, Colin had attended 7 different schools, had done stints in 2 boys' homes, and had been admitted to juvenile hall, in addition to twice being admitted to a psychiatric facility. Colin was described as being alienated by his peers, socially awkward, and often bullied at school. In fact, when he was attending the now defunct St. John's Lutheran School, he was attending the school on April 20th, 1999, the day Columbine happened. And after being bullied, Colin announced he was going to, quote, go home, get a gun, and come back and shoot them, meaning the bullies. He was, of course, immediately suspended. Columbine was actively happening when he said this. Colin would continue to get suspended and expelled from several different schools, and was described by multiple psychologists as being a, quote, Columbine kid. Some teachers described him as, quote, one of those kids who wanted to be known. And after his hospital release from his fight with his mother in 2004, he entered Laverne Lutheran High School, but he wouldn't even last a year there. In February of 2005, he was suspended and then subsequently expelled. He had threatened 4 students and planned to harm others. Apparently, Colin had told a friend that he had wanted to go in the trees and, quote, snipe people with an AK-47. And the friend, of course, reported this, and Colin's backpack was subsequently searched. And inside, they saw Colin had a list of chemicals that are used to make poisonous gas listed out. He had sketches of his school's courtyard, sketches of numerous explosives and guns and weapons, and 2 pages of narrative that appeared to be like dialogue that Colin was having with himself. It was like he was having a full-blown conversation with himself in these pages. Now, not only did this get Colin ultimately expelled, it also caused him to do a second stint at the Aurora Charter Oak Hospital in the psychiatric ward, and he spent a total of 3 days there, and this is when he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Colin would then go on to attend 2 more high schools, getting expelled from each one, until he landed at the Rancho San Antonio Boys' Home in Chatsworth, California. And this was in November of 2006. He only spent less than 3 months there, though, and an employee who worked there and worked with Colin said that Colin really should have stayed there longer because this boys' home really provided the type of structure and discipline that Colin desperately needed. And you know why Colin was only here for 3 months? Because the Los Angeles County Probation Department, they wanted to send Colin to a for-profit 6-bed boys' home. Or, excuse me, it's technically called a group home. And in August of 2007, even though both Linda and his probation department and probation officer had described Colin's progress as, quote, unsatisfactory, Judge Daniel Lopez terminated Colin's probation. And this was 5 months before the events of today's case take place. So I'm not sure why Colin was not taken care of. It's kind of like with, Howard Neal last week, right? Like, why aren't people like this taken care of? Why wasn't he taken from his crappy family's custody? I'm sorry, dude. His parents are trash. Now, not going to surprise you to know that Colin collected a lot of World War II memorabilia. Well, one specific thing from World War II. Can you guess what it was? Yeah, he collected Nazi memorabilia. He had a Nazi helmet from World War II, even though Linda, she straight out denies this, okay, and said, no, that's actually an American soldier's helmet from World War II. And Colin did not collect white supremacist or Nazi stuff. Even though he did have a Nazi helmet, he also had a cigar box with a swastika on it. And in this cigar box, by the way, was filled with shotgun shells. One of these shells, by the way, was filled with nails. And Colin also proudly displayed the Confederate flag. So yeah, sorry, Linda, if I don't take your word for it that your son did not collect Nazi crap and white supremacist crap. Shoot, I'd like to ask her, how would you know what your son collected? You weren't even home half the time, so how would you even know? Colin was also no stranger to guns. Being as his father was a police officer, it is said that Colin always had free, easy access to guns at his home, primarily thanks to his father, who would just let his son take them freely. Now, once again, though, Linda, Colin's mother, she denies this, all right? And she says that's not true. She claimed that the whole family was actually scared of Colin, so they actually locked up all their guns. And they locked them up tight in a, quote, special steel-doored room. But there were multiple sources and cops who reported that no, that wasn't true. There is no steel-doored room in the McLaughlin home, that they kept their weapons, and that Colin always had free, easy access to guns. And there were even more sources that said the weapons were not only not locked away, they were just, hanging around all over the house, fully loaded. Now, Linda also tries to claim that Colin was properly trained in gun safety and gun use. Yeah, okay. Now, Colin's MySpace page, because yes, kids, that MySpace, the original social media, this is the era that we're in. Colin's MySpace page was just littered with so many red flags. It was littered with posts and musings about violence and murder and killing. There are pictures of him showing off his father's weapons, trying to look like, like a big bad macho man. Instead, he just looks like a tool. On one post to his profile, Colin wrote, quote, I feel that if a person really needs it, they should be able to walk down a street with a .357, killing people at random. Again, I don't know why there isn't some place where Colin can be monitored and nurtured and helped, and events like today's case could be prevented. In another post to his MySpace page, Colin referred to himself as a, quote, equal opportunity merchant of death. And he misspelled opportunity. And yet another post, he said, quote, I entered this world screaming and covered in someone else's blood, and that's how I intend to leave it. Yeah. And on the day that David had called Sean, to get directions to the bunkers, on that same day, Colin had asked his dad for some guns. And of course, his dad just obliged. Of course, because why not? Why not, right? He gave his son a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun and a Mini 14 range rifle. And that evening, Colin, David, and Cameron all set out for the bunkers, where, as we know, the party was going on. They drove in Cameron's mom's Honda Odyssey van, and yeah, when they got there and saw that the party was in full swing, they asked, like, hey man, can we join you guys? Can we join this party? And the party goers obliged, of course. And the three boys then handed out raspberry-flavored Bacardi, and yeah, so the party, was in full swing. Now, at some point in the evening, during the party, Colin took his friends aside and told them about his plans for that evening, and that was for him to murder someone. He told them that he planned to kill the last person or persons at the party. And in preparation for this, Colin told Cameron to wait in his mother's van and act as a lookout. And he then handed Cameron the Mini 14. And so the party continued, and it continued until around 4 a.m. And after it was dispersed, Bodhi and Cody were the last ones left. Now, since it had been so late, Bodhi and Cody had actually planned on staying the night at the bunkers and spending the night under the desert stars and camping in Cody's Jeep. And so, Bodhi and Cody lay down in his Jeep and go to sleep. Now, at some point in the evening after Bodhi and Cody had laid down, Colin walked over to Cody's Jeep, banged on the window, and I'm assuming under the threat of his gun, forced Bodhi and Cody out of the Jeep and walked them into the bunkers. Bodhi and Cody had no socks or shoes on. Colin then forced the couple to follow him and David into the now dark, deserted bunkers. And remember, y'all, this is in the middle of the desert, all right? It's pitch black. It's January, so it's even more dark because it's winter time. So it is pitch black and it is cold. As they go in, Colin yelled at David that he needed some light because it was so dark. And according to David, he laid down the Mini 14 rifle that he had taken from Cameron, and in order to get out the flashlight, he set it down. But there's going to be some debate to that little fact, so just keep that in your noggin there. Colin then ordered Bodhi and Cody onto their knees. I read other sources that said Colin had actually pushed both of them to their knees. And the next thing that rang out across the Mojave Desert was 5 gunshots. Bodhi and Cody were dead. Now, when Leia had not heard from her daughter the next morning, as was customary, she immediately began to worry. I read other sources that said it was actually the relatives down in Orange County that had discovered Bodhi was not in her room and had called Leia and told her. Leia then got a phone call from Cody's parents, who also said that their son was missing and hadn't come home. And later that afternoon, an unknown caller phoned Leia and informed her that her daughter had last been seen at those bunkers in Barstow, and that Bodhi hadn't showed up that day. I don't know who the caller was, what the context was, or anything. That's just all the information the article I read said. Leia immediately called the police. The police were then dispatched to go check out the bunkers, and there they found Cody's Jeep parked where it had been, and when they ventured inside, they found the bodies of Bodhi and Cody. They had been shot execution style with gunshots in their backs and in the back of their heads. I read one source that said Bodhi and Cody's bodies were actually discovered by a friend who had actually went out to the bunkers looking for them. But I only read that in one source. A vigil was attended by hundreds of friends, fellow students, and members of the community for the young couple on January 11th. Now, what makes this extra awful for Cody's parents was that their 2-year-old granddaughter, Madeline, had actually died in a car accident only a year and a half prior to Cody's murder. Like, oh, I couldn't believe that when I read that. That's so heartbreaking. Like, it's so not fair that some people are exposed to just so much trauma and tragedy than any one person should ever experience. That really broke my heart. They came out and did some interviews with the press and just said that they really, really had to rely on each other during this point in their lives. I'm sure it had to have been like the worst point in their lives. A couple of weeks later, on January 17th, Colin and David were arrested. They were caught. They were arrested at their homes under suspicion of murder, and cops had been tipped off to David and Colin by David's friend who lived in Victorville, Sean. Apparently at some point in the 5 days since the murders, David had actually told Sean what they had done. He told Sean that the three of them had found some teens partying when they had gone camping, and that Colin told them how he had wanted to rob the last car left. And I don't know how long it took Sean to tell the police, but it wasn't long. Couldn't have been too long though, because the crime did happen on the 4th and they arrested on the 17th, so not sure if he sat on it for a couple weeks or what, but at least they were caught relatively quickly. Cameron was arrested a few months later in March of 2008. And so, great, we've got all three of them being charged with murder. Now, in March of 2011, Cameron pleaded guilty to 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter, attempted robbery, and use of a firearm, and he agreed to testify against both David and Colin at their trials. And this was after initially being charged with 2 counts of murder, kidnapping, and robbery. And Cameron had originally pleaded not guilty, claiming that he hadn't done anything. But by March of 2011, he was singing a different tune and took the plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years to life, and I read some sources that said he was actually credited with 3,582 days, which is almost 10 years, for time served and good behavior. Colin initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and this was in 2009, but in 2011, a jury found Colin to be mentally competent to stand trial. He had reportedly bragged to an inmate that he had killed a couple of high school sweethearts, and that, quote, it was an adrenaline rush. And he was also reportedly overheard telling inmates how he was going to, quote, pass as crazy. A psychologist, Dr. John Warrington, he saw Colin beginning in September of 2007, so before the murders, and he continued seeing Colin after the killings. Obviously, he was not aware of Colin's involvement, and so he continued to see Colin up until his arrest. Dr. Warrington stated that on their first session, Colin was clearly an unwilling participant. He was angry, and he actually stormed off in the middle of their first session. He testified that Colin was, quote, not merely vulnerable or susceptible to negative influences. He lived them, and it was that lifelong exposure to those influences that created the immature, emotionally unstable child who ended up at the bunker. In December of 2013, Colin pleaded out to a plea agreement before he went to trial, and he did this in order to avoid the death penalty because that was on the table. But in exchange with this plea deal and them taking the death penalty off the table, Colin would get life without parole, and he would have to waive his right to appeal the conviction. Even Leah was against the Colin getting the death penalty, but only because, according to her, it was too costly, too time-consuming, and it went against Boda's personal views. Leia did say that, personally, she didn't really care one way or the other, but in respect to her daughter, who she knew was against the death penalty, she advocated against it. She firmly believes that Colin is a cold-blooded killer and a sociopath who did know right from wrong. In January of 2014, Colin was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and like with the other two, he had been charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. At his sentencing, Cody's mother, Pamela, in her victim impact statement, she said of her son, quote, he had everything you never had, and he's everything you'll never be. He'll always be a better man than you, even dead. Which, burn. Damn. Leia delivered her impact statement as well, saying, among other things, quote, the day she died, the world went gray. The judge, Judge John Tomberlin, said he had never received so many victim impact statements for one case before. Now, Linda, Colin's mother, she thinks that the prosecution painted her son as a, quote, monster, and said, quote, others know differently, and I'm hoping we could move on. Yeah, easy for you to move on, right? Not like you ever cared for your kid to begin with. She says she did her best, but she failed to provide a sense of self for her son, which she said she lacked herself. Even though she's a special education teacher, she said, quote, professionally, I have a great sense of self. Yeah, I'm sorry, people like Colin's parents, like, I know we can't do this, obviously. Okay, I know. This is just like the raw, visceral, angry reaction part of me. I kind of wish that we could like charge these parents that are so terrible and traumatize their children to the point that their children go out and then murder and harm people. I wish we could like have their parents take responsibility for those actions too. Like, I wish Colin's parents could be held responsible as well. Like, I know obviously we can't do that, slippery slope, and yeah, I get that. I'm just saying, like, that's why I'm saying it's like that raw emotional side of me, because like, this is ridiculous. Like, why was Colin even allowed to continue staying with either of his parents? Why wasn't he taken? I don't know. At his sentencing hearing, Colin said that he blamed David, whom he said had a strong influence over him, but that at the same time seemed to not shirk his own responsibility. He said he was, quote, not proud of his crimes, saying, quote, but I am guilty, and I extend my apologies, although insignificant as they may seem, as sincere. He has since been transferred to 3 state prisons and is currently serving his sentence at High Desert State Prison in Susanville, California. David, all right, last but not least, David, he pleaded not guilty in September of 2016, arguing that he had placed his weapon down when Colin wanted that light, that he had placed the weapon down, and that he never once pointed the weapon at Bodhi or Cody, and that Colin was the only shooter. However, coroner's reports, they dispute this claim from David. They say that at least one shot was fired from that Mini 14, you know, the weapon that David had, and there were other inconsistencies in David's story that I guess forensics just did not support. He ended up accepting a plea deal where he would plead guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, and by pleading guilty, he would squash the other 8 felony counts that he was facing, which included kidnapping, attempted robbery, and use of a firearm. He was sentenced to 2 terms of 25 years to life in prison. Another source said that it was 50 years to life, with parole eligibility in 16 years. And he also got 8 years of time served. Cody's family did not attend David's sentencing hearing, with Pamela saying the case had held her hostage for far too long. David's attorneys, Jim Terrell and Sharon Brunner, they said, on behalf of their client, quote, my client was very young at the time this happened. He'll spend the rest of his life waking up with regret of what he's done every single day of the rest of his life. He has nothing but sorrow for what occurred and is very remorseful. Now, there are some, including Bodhi's mother, who think David was actually the main instigator and that he had used and manipulated Colin, who was very mentally unstable and very gullible. In a 2010 interview with the sheriff's homicide detective, David said he was, quote, using and abusing Colin for marijuana and had been hanging out with gang members in Los Angeles, committing armed robberies with them. David said he met Colin through Cameron, who was a mutual friend. Now, even Leia had sided with Colin's attorneys when Colin had tried to enter a guilty plea, and for a while, the prosecution would not accept it. Like, since 2008, Colin had, I guess, put in like a guilty plea or something, and the article I read said that Leia had actually tried to help Colin's attorneys because they believed David was the main instigator. I'm not sure. I was a little confused because in 2011, they had to have a hearing that declared Colin was mentally competent, so I'm not sure. But this source said that Colin had tried to put in a guilty plea since 2008, and in 2013, for whatever reason, the prosecution had a change of heart. Colin's defense attorneys, they wondered if what changed the prosecution's mind had to do with all the motions that they had filed. They alleged that the police violated Colin's rights and used deceptive police tactics on him. Apparently, after both David and Colin's arrests, investigators attempted to have David elicit incriminating statements from Colin, even after Colin had said that he wanted an attorney. And maybe that's why Leia had been trying to get Colin's guilty plea accepted, because she was more concerned with David getting off light. She wanted David to receive the maximum punishment possible. And she was afraid that David was going to get a lighter sentence because he was going to testify at Colin's trial. So yeah, a little confused about like the events as far as that's concerned, like whether David was trying to plead guilty since 2008 when he was arrested. I was a little confused about that. But in the end, at least David was given a harsh sentence. Leia is now living in Florida. She retired from psychology work when her daughter was murdered. She works at a wildlife rescue, and in 2016, she was pursuing a captain's license for boating so that she could like go and rescue marine life. She also at that time said that she had continued to counsel teens with depression and other like mental health issues. I don't know what she is doing today. That 2016 article was the latest information that I had of what happened to her. I hope that she got her license. I hope that, you know, she's feeling fulfilled rescuing marine life. And Zen, Boda's older brother, he had, you know, moved on. He ended up getting married. He had actually postponed his wedding until David's trial was over, and then he got married. And yeah, same with Leia. This was information I got from a 2016 article. Not sure what they are up to today. I hope they are, you know, doing well and surviving and being happy as best as they could, you know, given the circumstances. In April of 2016, Cody's parents, Pamela and Mike, they actually moved out of the high desert. And remember, guys, their families had been up there for 4 generations, but they had to leave the trauma behind. They just could not be in that area anymore. And I totally do not blame them. I think I would probably be the same way. Wayne, Colin's father, you know, the racist ex-cop who had a bunch of guns laying around, he died from heart failure and complications from diabetes on March 4th, 2011. And Boda and Cody's death, they led to the formation of a nonprofit organization called the Phoenix Foundation. It's a local nonprofit organization that raises money for victims of tragedies such as Boda and Cody's families. Leia had unsuccessfully tried to sue the federal government for her daughter's deaths. Cody's parents also joined in on the suit. They were arguing that the federal government had liability in their deaths because there was like this large abandoned bunkers and structure out in the middle of the desert, no signage, no like keep out or no trespass. Like there was nothing up to dissuade people from entering it. And so Leia and Cody's parents did try to sue the federal government for liability in their children's deaths, but they were unsuccessful. Leia and Pamela also made it their mission to make sure that those bunkers where their children were murdered were absolutely destroyed. They wanted them demolished so that this never happened to any other family. And when they started bringing up this issue, there were a lot of people who couldn't believe, just like, oh my God, there was like this just like rando 2-story structure out in the middle of the desert that like people could just go willy-willy, like nilly-willy walk and party at. Like that's really wild. And of course, the bunkers attracted more attention once the story got out. The story made the local press rounds and was a pretty big story in the Victorville, Apple Valley, Hesperia area. And so, of course, the bunkers became an attraction. Finally, the local authorities had to officially shut it down and close it off. Now, some said that there really wasn't a point in this because there are a lot of abandoned mines and structures and stuff like that all over the Mojave Desert. And they're like, well, if you just close this one off, someone is just going to go find another one. Now, when the murders first happened, you know, and Leia and Pam were talking to the press about how, like, the need to have these bunkers destroyed so this didn't happen again, that land that those bunkers sat on, there was some dispute as to who was responsible for destroying those bunkers. The Air Force and the Federal Bureau of Land Management kept pointing the fingers at each other, saying, well, like, no, it's your responsibility. Oh, no, it's your responsibility. Each one saying that the other had the responsibility to destroy it because it was their, like, property. But eventually, I believe the property that the bunker sat on was sold off to the military, and the bunkers were finally demolished in April of 2008. So not too long after Boda and Cody's deaths. So only about like 3 months or so after, they just completely demolished the bunkers. And that is the tale of the bunker murders. That I couldn't believe that this had happened so close to an area that I grew up in. I was born in Apple Valley and was raised in the Victorville area, went to junior high in Hesperia. And yeah, this case was just so heartbreaking to research, especially the more I found out about like Boda and Cody. I was like, dude, like I had so much in common with them, and it sucks that no one can spend time with them, get to know them, or do anything with them ever again. And it's just so heartbreaking. And like, as far as Colin, like it sucks for him too that he did not have a chance, man. He just did not have a chance. Like, it's just such a mess. Like, and I do blame Colin's parents as much as Colin, David, and Cameron themselves. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, that's a child. You have a human being. Like, I'm sorry, they just did not provide a stable environment at all for their son. And I can't believe Linda's a special education teacher. That really frightens me. Those poor children under her charge. Like, I don't know. I'm super curious to know what you guys think of this. Like, please tell me, like, what do you think of Colin's parents? What do you think of this? Like, how do you feel about cases like this where the perpetrator is just so mentally unwell and just had everything stacked against them? Like, does it make you feel different than other true crime cases where the murderer didn't come from tragic, circumstances or background? I would love to know what you think. And I think that will do it for this week on Crime Dive. Yeah, this lipstick was a choice, right? It's a choice. I don't know, it's pretty bright. I like it. I don't know. Like, I just wanted to do something different. I always do black lipstick with pink, and I don't know, just wanted to try something different. And it's definitely a choice. I kind of feel like the Itchy Bond from Men from Friends. Anyway, y'all, I hope you have a wonderful week. I will see you next week for another Crime Dive. Take care of yourself out there. Just be safe. And remember, like I always say, don't be a dick. Just be a decent person, especially right now, man. It is very, very tough out there. And we really just need to stick together and just be decent to one another. All right? Alrighty, y'all. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.